The garden was my refuge, a quiet stretch of earth where memory and time moved slowly, each visit a ritual steeped in calm and reflection. I knelt among the chrysanthemums, their fragile petals soft beneath my fingers, as the crisp breath of autumn whispered through the branches above. The earth smelled of decay and promise all at once, a strange mix that reminded me how life and death were always intertwined. This garden had witnessed decades of our family's story. My husband, Thomas, had built this sanctuary with his own hands, planting each flower as if weaving a secret language between his heart and the soil. The flowers thrived under his care, just as our family had once flourished in the quiet warmth of his presence. Now, the house felt unbearably empty. The photographs on the mantel, Thomas smiling with gentle eyes, our children frozen in timeless innocence, stood as silent sentinels to a time that had slipped far away. The absence he left loosened the air in this home, making it fragile, vulnerable to all the storms that life might bring. Still, I found a strange comfort in the routine tending of the garden. It was one of the last places where I felt connected to him, to the hope we had once shared. That morning was particularly sharp, the air biting enough to bring color to my cheeks as I worked. My coat was pulled tightly around my thin frame, and I could see my breath curling into the air in small clouds. The world felt quieter than usual, as if it too were holding its breath for what was to come. And then, my phone shattered that silence. The screen lit up with Matthew's name. His voice was steady, but with an edge I hadn't heard for years, a practiced calm that barely masked urgency. He spoke of a new charity he had founded, a cause to help children living in hardship. The sincerity in his words was almost convincing, the worry carefully measured to inspire trust. He said there was a mounting need, and he asked for help, financial help. A mother's instinct softened the edges of my doubt. Despite the distance and the fractures that had grown between us, I wanted to believe in the son I had raised. I reached for my checkbook, the leather worn soft from years of handling. The pen hovered for a heartbeat, then moved with quiet certainty as I filled out the amount, an amount I considered generous but necessary. I signed my name with a steady hand, despite the knot forming in my throat. This was a gift, an olive branch stretched across silent years of misunderstanding. Days passed slowly. The garden continued to breathe in its quiet way, each flower opening and closing with the rhythm of seasons. I waited, half expecting a call to say thank you, or perhaps news of the charity's progress. But nothing came. Instead, one evening in the fading light, I found myself drawn back to the television, the only sound in the house the low hum of the evening news. The anchor's voice cut through the quiet like a blade, revealing a bitter truth. Matthew's charity, the one he had spoken to me about with such conviction, was nothing but a lie, an elaborate scheme to siphon money for personal gain. The reports showed outraged donors, legal inquiries, and a scandal unraveling far beyond what I could have imagined. My son, the boy I had loved and raised, was at the center of the deceit. I sat frozen, the room closing in on me. A weight settled deep in my chest, dragging breath and hope alike down into a dark place. It was not just the sting of betrayal, it was an unbearable sorrow, the kind that hollows out the spaces inside you. The son who should have been my pride was instead a stranger woven from falsehoods and greed. The house grew colder. I looked around at the walls that once echoed with laughter and life and felt the silence stretch like a shroud. Letters and messages remained unopened on the kitchen table. I held on to a faint hope for a call, an apology, some flicker of regret, but the phone stayed silent. Matthew's betrayal had not come with an explanation. Instead, it brought a void that echoed louder than words. Outside, the chrysanthemums bloomed, untouched by human wounds. The garden was oblivious to the pain beneath the roof, its delicate flowers pushing up through the earth in defiance of the coming frost. The contrast was cruel, a world that kept turning while mine had fractured. That night, tears came quietly, tracing invisible paths down my face. They were not simply for the son who had deceived me, but for the years I had spent shielding illusions, for faith placed in shaky hands and broken promises. Each tear carried the weight of love turned fragile and burdened. I lay awake as the house settled into stillness, my mind drifting through memories now stained with sorrow. The sacrifices I had made, the long nights working multiple jobs, the silent prayers, the unwavering support felt suddenly fragile, like sand slipping through trembling fingers. The family I had dreamed of, the unity I had hoped to protect, was scattered in shards beneath me. Yet, amid that ruin, something unexpected began to rise, an ember glowing faint in the cold dark. The realization that the greatest threat had never been outside these walls but inside, bleeding from the hand I once held. A hard clarity settled over me, sharper than pain, colder than tears. The garden whispered to me through the wine, life was stubborn, persistent. Even in decay, there was a promise of growth. Though the wound was fresh and raw, a new awareness began to form within me, a reckoning that could not be denied. As dawn crept over the horizon and the chill softened, I felt the weight within start to shift. The betrayal was profound, but it would not consume me. Something older, stronger was stirring in the depths of my being. Quiet strength, born from the breaking, was beginning to take root. Under the pale light of a new day, I closed my eyes and breathed in the stillness a silence that would nurture a different kind of life, a silent revolution born from sorrow and resolve. The days that followed stretched long and heavy, draped in a silence that filled the empty spaces of my home. I moved through each moment as if in a fog, the shadows of what had happened clinging to me. The walls that once held laughter and warmth now echoed with quiet memories, fragile and distant. It was in these quiet hours that the weight of betrayal pressed deepest against my chest, whispering doubts and regrets that refused to fade. At night, sleep was never more than an elusive visitor. Restlessness pulled me under waves of relentless questions. How had I not seen it coming? Where did love turn into blindness? The sacrifices I had made, the endless nights working so my children could have better, suddenly seemed swallowed by a chasm of disappointment and loss. Each whispered prayer and hopeful word felt fragile, like glass threatening to shatter with the smallest touch. I found myself reaching for photographs and keepsakes, relics of a family I had once trusted fully. Faces stared back with innocence now tainted by shadow. Matthew as an eager boy, ambitious and vibrant. Jenna, once a welcoming figure in my life. Thomas, steadfast and calm, his presence now a distant memory. These brief snapshots captured happiness I could scarcely believe anymore. I thought a great deal about the early years, the long days and longer nights I spent weaving a tapestry of love around my children. I remembered the debts paid, the meals cooked in silence, the unspoken hopes carried like a sacred flame. I had wanted to protect them from the harshness of the world, preparing them for all its demands. Yet I feared now that I had failed most with Matthew. His hunger for wealth and approval had always been insistent, a fire I had mistaken for ambition. I wondered how many warnings I had gradually ignored, moments when his need for validation eclipsed our connection. Looking back, his words often felt rehearsed, his excuses thinly veiled appeals to entitlement I quietly resented but never confronted. Had Jenna been part of this deception all along? Or was she too ensnared in a web she could not escape? The thought tore at me, layering grief upon betrayal. The house felt colder still with every passing day, as if the silence was a living thing pressing down, making it harder to breathe. Loneliness wrapped tightly around me, but beneath the aching sorrow, a quiet resolve began to grow. The pain I carried, so raw and fresh, slowly forged into something stronger, a need to reclaim control over my life and my story. One frost-bitten morning, sitting at the kitchen table with pen and paper, I began to write, not out of bitterness, but out of a desperate search for clarity and purpose. The pages filled with my raw thoughts, pain, memories, doubts, and slowly emerging strength. I chronicled the love and sacrifices, the cracks in trust, and the widening betrayal. Writing became a mirror I held up to myself, reflecting not just what was broken but what remained whole within me. It dawned on me then that this was not an ending, but a fissure opening into a new beginning. The home I thought was crumbling could become the foundation for rebuilding if I was willing to be patient and strategic. Little by little, simple acts of organization and attention gave me a fragile sense of control. Sorting through mail, cleaning forgotten corners, placing memories in neat piles, all were small protests against chaos. Justice began to take a new shape in my mind, not the justice of anger or revenge, but a quiet reclaiming of dignity and truth. I knew I was not safe to confront Matthew openly, not yet. That would only scatter ashes. Instead, I needed understanding, evidence, and time. The betrayal that had once overwhelmed me became the catalyst for awakening. No longer willing to be victimized, I vowed to watch closely, to listen carefully, and to plan deliberately. The strength within was not the shout of fury, but the steady pulse of patience and resilience inherited from years of hardship. Behind closed doors, I searched through my late husband Thomas's papers, his careful records and protected investments, a beacon in the murky sea of my doubts. His cautious wisdom spoke through neat files and detailed accounts, showing me a side of our wealth I had barely understood. It was more than money. It was the armor for the next step in my fight. With this newfound knowledge, I began to reconnect with old friends and allies who had stood beside Thomas in the past. Among them was Tony, his trusted lawyer, whose thoughtful counsel offered the steady hand I needed. Reaching out to him felt like stepping into light after long darkness, a chance to build a strategy grounded in calm resolve rather than desperation. My days filled with careful research, comparing legitimate charities to the false front Matthew had constructed. Each discovery strengthened my resolve. If restitution was possible, it would come through meticulous action, not impulsive confrontation. Now, as the house slowly shed its burden of sorrow, the loneliness no longer devastated me. Instead, it became a crucible where patience and determination were born. I was not broken, I was becoming something new. The strength I cultivated was quiet but fierce, a slow-burning fire fed by years of unspoken resilience. This was the beginning of my silent revolution, a quest not for grand gestures or public denunciations, but for justice woven through wisdom, patience, and subtle power. This was the battle I embraced, a measured fight where each step forward was guarded and deliberate, where truth would outlast the lies laid bare by betrayal. And in this newfound clarity, I stood ready to reclaim all that had been lost, not just possessions, but peace, dignity, and the true legacy of my family. The foundation of my resolve began to take shape during quiet early mornings and late nights when the world seemed to fall away, leaving room for reflection. In those moments, I sifted through Thomas's carefully kept files, a legacy of foresight and precision. Each document was a map, leading me to resources I had barely understood before: accounts, investments, and trusts, all tools of security and power quietly preserved beneath the surface of everyday life. As I examined these papers, It struck me how much of my life I had lived openly nurturing family and home while the true strength of our estate was carefully hidden behind layers of legal protection. This revelation was both a comfort and a burden. The assets Thomas had safeguarded were substantial, an anchor that could steady me against the tempests Matthew's greed had stirred. It was clear that, although his lies had caused deep wounds, the fortress Thomas built remained intact enough to protect what was rightfully mine, the legacy I intended to defend. But knowledge and money alone would not win this battle. I needed allies who understood the subtleties of justice, beyond anger or vengeance. My thoughts turned to Tony, Thomas's trusted lawyer. For years, he had guided us through complex estate matters with quiet expertise. Calling him was difficult, but necessary. I could no longer face this alone. When his calm voice answered, a knot in my chest eased. Arranging a meeting marked the first concrete step from paralysis toward action. We met in Tony's office, surrounded by shelves heavy with books and records. The familiar scent of aged paper mingled with the gravity of our conversation. I laid out the story: the betrayal, the shattered trust, the need to navigate legal waters carefully. Tony listened without judgment, his demeanor steady, focused on unearthing the truth deeply buried beneath the chaos. Together, we began to untangle the web. Tony flagged irregularities in Matthew's charity accounts, indicating clear signs of manipulation and deceit. Beyond that, he illuminated the protections Thomas had put in place: trusts that shielded key assets from unauthorized transfer, with controls Matthew underestimated. Amid the layers of deception, I felt the stirrings of hope. My days transformed. Morning hours became dedicated to tracing the maze of financial trails and legal paperwork. Afternoons were for discreet inquiries, calls to reputable charities, and thoughtful discussions with Tony. Each piece of information added another brushstroke to a clearer picture: what Matthew took, what remained steady under Thomas's careful stewardship. This slow, meticulous reclaiming of control became the core of my new existence. Researching legitimate charities revealed a stark contrast. Matthew's facade hid a cruel lie, but countless organizations remained devoted to genuine aid with transparency and trust at their foundations. Contacting some, I learned how they maintained integrity, measured impact, and honored the sacred trust between giver and receiver. These conversations grounded me, reminding me that my fight was about more than money. It was about preserving the dignity of gift and family. That clarity deepened my resolve. Rather than angrily retaliate, I would quietly support causes aligned with Thomas's values. Through Tony's guidance, I began quietly redirecting funds toward these organizations, ensuring that my husband's legacy and my principles intertwined to confront my son's greed with real good. The process was slow, often harrowing. Every exposed lie, every forged document, gnawed at me. But beneath the pain arose a strength tempered by patience and sharpened by clarity. Grief and anger gave way to resolve, the engine that would power change. Maintaining composure amid conversations about Matthew was a test of endurance. Friends spoke proudly of his achievements, blissfully unaware of his deceit. I smiled with practiced gentleness, listening then retreating within, steeling myself for the battle I fought quietly beneath the surface. It was a performance of dignity, honed to a razor's edge. A turning point came with news of an upcoming charity gala where Matthew would speak, a glittering stage designed for his self-promotion. This event, filled with supporters who admired him blindly, was his moment to bask in false glory. But for me, it was the perfect place to strike, to reveal truths hidden beneath years of illusion. I approached this next step not with desperate emotion but measured preparation. Together with Tony, we crafted a strategy rooted in fact and legal right. Evidence was gathered meticulously, every document cross-checked, every claim scrutinized. We made sure that when the moment came, there would be no doubt, no room for Matthew's spin or Jenna's damage control. Our plan would be clear, undeniable, and decisive. Alongside legal preparation, I built a network of quiet support friends who remembered Thomas's honor, charitable leaders committed to truth, and professionals who understood the delicacy of what awaited us. My husband had often said strength lay in both numbers and strategy. I came to understand that fully now this was not a battle of force but of patience and intellect. When the day of the gala arrived, I was composed, not as a grieving mother, but as a woman ready to reclaim her agency and dignity. The air in the grand hall shimmered with opulence. Chandeliers struck sparkling arcs over a room filled with murmuring guests. Matthew appeared radiant in his tailored suit, flashing the same practiced smile that had fooled so many. He moved among the crowd, assured in his false image, oblivious to the storm nearing quietly. From my seat among the audience, I saw Jenna murmuring into his ear a picture of ambition united, unaware of the quiet reckoning about to unfold. When Matthew stepped to the podium, confidence radiated from him, a man prepared to deliver his polished speech. My heart steadied. The years of silent work had prepared me for this moment. I was no longer a broken woman, but a quiet force bearing the truth. This was not a moment of rage or public spectacle. It was the culmination of patience, investigation, and wisdom, a deliberate unmasking of betrayal that would speak louder than any accusation. I was ready to reclaim what had been stolen, not just material wealth, but the honor and legacy of the family Thomas had built with love. This silent revolution I had nurtured, born from pain, but fueled by resolve, would find its voice at last. Even as I prepared to stand, my mind retraced each painstaking step, the silent nights going through files, Tony's calm guidance, the quiet calls to charities, and the resolve hardening in my chest. I remembered why this was more than just financial restitution. It was justice, dignity restored, a family legacy reclaimed. I breathed deeply, steadying myself for the moment when silence would finally break, and truth would ring out for all to hear. The grand hall was a sea of glittering gowns, the glint of crystal glasses, and soft murmurings that barely masked the excitement pulsing beneath the surface. The air hung heavy with the scent of perfume and polished wood, a warmth that wrapped the crowd in a cozy embrace. Yet beneath this veneer of elegance, a storm gathered, quiet, relentless, unseen by most but burning within me. Matthew moved through the throng like a man secure on his throne, radiating confidence with each practiced smile and friendly handshake. I counted every step he took, every nod exchanged, the casual ease with which he basked in the admiration of strangers who had never glimpsed beneath the polished surface. To them, he was a hero, a generous benefactor with a heart for the less fortunate. To me, he was a liar, a thief who had built his kingdom on sand and falsehoods. From my seat in the shadows of the balcony, I saw Jenna whispering into his ear, their faces inches apart, sharing secrets and dreams. She was an anchor to his bravado, feeding the illusion with her own ambition. Neither suspected that the tides were turning. They had no idea that the woman they had betrayed, forgotten, would be the one to bring their empire crumbling down. The murmur of the crowd hushed as Matthew ascended the podium to deliver his speech. The polished confidence in his voice was almost theatrical as he spun tales of charity and hope, of dreams nurtured and futures transformed. He spoke of the children touched by his organization, the families helped, the promises made. His words were honeyed, designed to soothe doubts and inspire belief. When he smiled, the crowd smiled back, wrapped in the illusion he had so carefully cultivated. Yet, beneath their applause and admiration, I felt the years of deceit tightening around him like an invisible noose. Every line of his speech echoed hollow, a script fed by lies and greed. My heart held steady, the countless nights of planning and searching lending me the strength to face this moment without faltering. I was no longer the woman broken by betrayal. I was a force of quiet resolve. When Matthew finished, the polite applause swelled, and the microphone was passed to me. Rising slowly, I allowed the silence to stretch, feeling the weight of expectation press against my ribs. My voice, when it began, was calm and clear, carrying with it the years of pain, patience, and unyielding determination. I spoke of trust, the fragile bond that imbues acts of kindness and generosity with meaning. I spoke of betrayal, how it severs that bond, leaving wounds deeper than money can measure. I told the crowd of the charities I had supported quietly, organizations grounded in transparency and integrity, standing as a stark contrast to the facade before them. Then came the moment that stilled the room. I held up the check Matthew had begged me to write, the very check meant to build hope but instead funding a sham. I detailed how the money vanished, how the charity was hollow, how the promises were empty lies wrapped in ambition and greed. The faces around me shifted, confusion, shock, disbelief painted across eyes wide and mouths half open. Matthew's veneer cracked, the confident mask faltered. His eyes scanned the crowd desperately for allies, but those expressions were veiled disbelief and guarded surprise. The imperial throne he had perched upon wobbled precariously. Jenna stepped forward, her lips moving in hurried whispers to deflect, to spin excuses, but her efforts were futile. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a ripple of unease spreading into a wave. The facade they once admired shattered in the brilliant light of exposure. I met Matthew's gaze steadily, sharing a silence heavier than any accusation. The betrayal stretched between us in sharp angles, its weight an unspoken sentence. The pride that had carried him crumbled, replaced by a raw vulnerability stripped bare before witnesses. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, their whispers lingering like ghosts in the opulent hall, I felt an unexpected peace unfurl within me. The storm born of deception had broken, swept away by a tide of truth that could no longer be denied. The justice I sought was not born from rage but from measured courage and unwavering resolve. Later, away from the flashing cameras and murmuring guests, I stepped outside into the cool embrace of night. The garden stretched before me, its quiet serenity a balm to my still throbbing heart. The chrysanthemums, resilient and steadfast, shimmered in the moonlight, their petals unfazed by the chill. In their gentle persistence, I saw a reflection of my own journey. From the shattered pieces of trust and love, something stronger had grown, quiet yet unstoppable, a slow-burning fire forged in pain and patience. The house, once heavy with memories and heartache, felt lighter now, a place where healing could take root and new chapters begin. The burden of betrayal lifted, replaced by clarity and peace. The end of one story marked the start of another one where justice, dignity, and legacy reclaimed their rightful place. I realized this was not vengeance, but restoration, not destruction, but renewal. In that silent garden, beneath the soft glow of the stars, I whispered the truth I had carried all along. Betrayal birthed my strength. This was the silent revolution that saved me, transforming silence into a voice, grief into resolve, and loss into a future reclaimed. The days that followed the gala unfolded in a quiet tension that lingered like a slowly fading melody. The truth had been spoken publicly, undeniable and sharp, yet its aftershocks rippled beneath the surface, weaving through family, friends, and the uncomfortable spaces of whispered conversations. The crowd dispersed, but the weight of what had been revealed settled deeply, reshaping the contours of everything I thought I knew. Returning home, the echo of the night's revelations clung to me, but so did a strange, liberating calm. The air felt lighter. The walls, once burdened by memories and secrets, seemed more open, breathing alongside me for the first time in years. The heavy sorrow I had carried slowly untangled, replaced by clarity and a determination rooted in wisdom rather than desperation. Though Matthew's fall from grace was swift in public view, the real battle unfurled in layers: legal complexities, familial tensions, and the quiet work of rebuilding trust and honor. Denials came, soft at first, then more strained. Attempts to mask failure and rewrite narratives emerged, but each was met with the measured strength I had cultivated. I had learned to answer threats veiled as concern with silence where words could weaken and patience where haste might falter. Tony remained an unwavering presence beside me, a steady beacon through this storm. Day after day, we delved into the tangled financial threads, gathering documents that spoke loudest when voices could be silenced. With each paper we turned, each ledger we examined, I saw the intricate web Matthew had spun: deceit layered in carefully crafted lies. But with evidence in hand, the fortress of truth grew impenetrable, brick by painstaking brick. My trusted allies within the charities I supported offered more than counsel. Their integrity and commitment to transparency reaffirmed the very reasons behind my fight. Together, we ensured the redirected funds would honor those truly in need, a living testament to a legacy founded on genuine compassion, not selfish ambition. Family, always the most fragile terrain, required the deepest courage. Inviting Matthew's siblings into the fold of truth was daunting. Bonds stretched thin by years of silent grievances and unspoken hopes strained under the weight of revelations. Yet, in those raw conversations, a fragile hope surfaced: a willingness to confront pain, to acknowledge broken ties, and, perhaps, to begin healing. Through it all, Matthew's defenses crumbled. His bluster gave way to retreat, attempts to rewrite his narrative growing more urgent but less convincing. Every falter strengthened my resolve, a quiet reminder that truth, once uncovered, has a force all its own. The confrontation was asymmetric. His anger and desperation met my calculated silence and strategic moves. I acted not out of fury but through a disciplined patience, knowing that steady steps would dismantle the house of cards he'd built. Through this quiet war, I reclaimed power not by volume but by steadfastness. In moments of public scrutiny and private reflection, Jenna's presence loomed, a reminder of shared ambition and shared downfall. Yet I met her not with confrontation but with calm observation, letting the weight of truth settle where words might fail. That journey was neither swift nor easy. Days weighed heavy with exhaustion and sorrow. But beneath the surface, a transformation took place: a shedding of old burdens and the birth of something stronger, resilience refined by hardship and hope. One quiet evening, after a day layered with calls and meetings, I stood by the window looking out over the garden. The chrysanthemums gleamed softly beneath the moon's gentle light, their petals firm against the cool night air. Their stubborn beauty, flowering despite frost and darkness, mirrored my own path. The house, once a vessel of pain, now pulsed with the possibility of renewal. Thomas's memory, once overshadowed by betrayal, stood protected, honored not just through papers but through the unwavering commitment to truth and justice that now defined us. In the stillness, I whispered the truth that had carried me through the darkest days. Betrayal birthed my strength. This quiet revolution, born in the silence of heartbreak and the fire of resolve had saved me. It transformed grief into power, loss into reclaimed hope, and silence into a voice that would never again be hushed. The house had shifted in ways I could feel as I walked its familiar halls. The weight that once pressed heavy now lifted, giving way to a gentle openness that embraced rather than confined. The air felt lighter, each breath less burdened by shadows once cast deep within these walls. The silence was no longer oppressive, but a space where healing could begin. I often found myself drawn to the garden during the quiet hours of the evening. The chrysanthemums bloomed with an enduring grace, their petals delicate yet steadfast against the cool night breeze. In their resilience, I recognized the reflection of my own journey, a slow, steady growth through trial and pain, nurtured by patience and quiet strength. This transformation was not immediate nor without struggle. There were countless moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, when sorrow tried to unravel the resolve I had fought so hard to build. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle but profound change was taking place, a shedding of old wounds, and the emergence of a fortified spirit. Thomas's memory, once overshadowed by the turmoil that had invaded our lives, found renewed honor not simply in documents or possessions, but in the unwavering commitment to truth and justice that I carried forward. His legacy was no longer at risk of being lost to deceit. It was safeguarded by the quiet but unbreakable strength that had grown within me. Friends who had stood steadfastly by my side returned with renewed warmth, their presence a balm to my healing heart. Conversations flowed with sincerity, free from the weight of unspoken tensions that had once clouded our interactions. Through these shared moments, I rediscovered the power of connection and the comfort it brings. At night, as the moonlight poured softly over the garden, I often whispered the words that had become my mantra. Betrayal birthed my strength. These words held the story of my transformation, the passage from silence and pain to voice and empowerment. They embodied the revolution I had lived through, one born not from loud defiance but from the patient and unwavering assertion of truth. Each new day was an opportunity to nurture this strength, to build a future not defined by past wounds but shaped by hope and resilience. The house, my home, was more than a structure. It was a sanctuary where love endured beyond betrayal, where silence held power, and where the promise of renewal blossomed like the steadfast chrysanthemums outside. In embracing this new chapter, I found peace, a peace born from standing firm in the face of adversity and choosing to rise, quietly but resolutely. The path ahead was unknown, but for the first time in a long while, it gleamed with possibility and light.